Coming up on this Thursday edition of Newsline at noon, 2 buildings in New York City collapsed in an explosion believed to be caused by a gas leak. At least 3 people are dead and dozens injured. High-level talks between Korea and Japan end with no progress in mending strained ties, with Seoul urging Tokyo to show sincerity in resolving disputes over wartime sex slaves. Plus, the government and medical doctors agreed to seek a compromise to avert a planned strike by thousands of practitioners. These stories and more on Newsline at noon. Thanks for joining us. You're watching Newsline at noon. I'm Jeunhye in Seoul.
Very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this lunchtime. Rescuers are still searching for the missing following a deadly building explosion in New York City that's left at least 3 dead and dozens injured.
Several people remain unaccounted for at the moment, and authorities suspect that the blast was caused by a gas leak. Our Kwon Soa has the details.
New York City's mayor has called it a tragedy of the worst kind. 2 buildings in the city's East Harlem neighborhood completely collapsed on Wednesday morning local time, killing at least 3 people and injuring well over 60. 9 others remain unaccounted for. Thick smoke and debris covered the neighborhood. Nearby structures were badly damaged by what witnesses say was a massive explosion. Residents close to the incident have been evacuated.
It blew out some of our windows, like in the back of the building. The whole courtyard had glass in it, and like my apartment shook.
New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio rushed to the scene to take stock of the situation and spoke at an emergency press conference.
So today, at approximately 9:30 a.m., there was a major explosion that destroyed 2 buildings. Explosion was based on a gas leak. The impact affected buildings around the 2 that were destroyed. Very heavy impact on the surrounding buildings. A heavy fire has ensued as well.
A resident in an adjacent building reported smelling gas just 15 minutes prior to the blast. Other people in the neighborhood have also told reporters they had smelled a gas-like odor since the day before. The New York Fire Department has classified the incident as the highest threat level possible. Around 250 firemen were on site after it occurred, and there are dozens still searching for the missing, feared trapped under the debris. Mayor de Blasio praised the city's fire department for its quick response, especially as there was no indication in time to save people. The White House says President Barack Obama was briefed on the incident and has sent his condolences to the victims' families. Kwon Soa, Arirang News.
For the first time in 8 months, the vice foreign ministers of South Korea and Japan sat down for face-to-face talks in Seoul on Wednesday. But as our Hwang Seong-hee reports, the 2 diplomats made little headway in resolving the historical and territorial differences that have seen bilateral relations tumble to new lows in recent months.
After 3 hours of talks in Seoul on Wednesday, the vice foreign ministers from South Korea and Japan failed to make much progress on improving their frayed ties. South Korean Vice Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yong stressed that Japan should refrain from revising history and work towards restoring trust by resolving the unsettled issue of its wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women. In response, Japanese Vice Foreign Minister Akitaka Saiki said his government maintains the historical perceptions of Japan's previous administrations. Tensions are high between the 2 neighbors. Seoul feels Tokyo has never officially compensated the so-called comfort women who were forced into sexual slavery during the Second World War. To this day, Japanese politicians consistently make negative comments about the elderly victims. The diplomatic row has taken its toll on the South Korean public's perception of Japan. Public sentiment on Japan is so low that a recent poll released by the Asan Institute for Policy Studies show that South Koreans perceive Japan as a bigger threat than North Korea. According to the Asan poll, more than 65% of the South Korean public feel threatened by Japan, larger than the 60% of the population that fear North Korea. The figure reflects Seoul's overall consensus on Tokyo.
And that, I'm sure, coincides with all the statements about comfort women, the increased attention that Japan is paying towards Dokdo. And so all of these things are starting to drive up these threat perceptions now.
Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is reportedly pushing to hold his first summit with his South Korean counterpart. But President Park Geun-hye is insistent she will not sit down with a leader who fails to acknowledge his country's historical wrongdoings. Kwon Soa, Arirang News.
Now, referring to Japan's denial of its wartime atrocities, President Park Geun-hye said historical issues among Korea, Japan, and China break down trust and ultimately hamper efforts towards realizing prosperity and fulfilling regional interests. In an interview with CNN as the network's leading woman for this month, President Park said she hopes that the three nations will pass down a future in which younger generations can amicably join in efforts to maintain peace and stability in Northeast Asia and achieve co-prosperity. Asked about how she plans to ensure there is equality in Korea's still male-dominated society, Korea's first female president said she'll seek to build a society where women can live up to their potential and build their careers. On a similar note, Korea's gender equality minister says the reason violence against women continues is because past wrongs have never been corrected, pointing in particular to the issue of sexual slavery by the Japanese military during World War II. Speaking at Columbia University in New York on Wednesday, Minister Cho Yoon-sun stressed that the issue of sexual slavery between Korea and Japan is related to the ongoing abuses against women in troubled parts of the world. She urged young people to help ensure that the kinds of women's rights abuses seen during the war are not repeated. The U.S. state of New York is inching closer to using the name East Sea for the body of water between Korea and Japan. A Korean-American community group there says the New York State Senate's Judiciary Committee passed a bill Tuesday requiring both East Sea and Sea of Japan be used in all school textbooks published after July 1st. The legislation will take effect if it is passed by both state houses and signed by the governor. A similar bill was passed by lawmakers in Virginia last month and is awaiting the Virginia governor's approval.
South Korea will sign a contract before the year is out to overhaul its Patriot missile system. The new system and missiles, which will cost well in excess of $1 billion, are set for delivery starting 2016. Shin Se-min reports.
South Korea will sign a deal to upgrade its Patriot missile system by the end of this year. Officials at the Defense Acquisition Program Administration said Wednesday that it will upgrade the country's current PAC-2 air defense system to a PAC-3 configuration to improve South Korea's air defenses against North Korea. The new system and missiles will be purchased from U.S. defense firms Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. Although the State Arms Procurement Agency declined to comment on how much the new missiles would cost or give any further details, the Defense Ministry has set aside some $1.4 billion for the adoption of new defense system. Delivery is expected to start in 2016. The new defense system packs hit-to-kill PAC-3 missiles with upgraded accuracy, and it'll enhance PAC-2 fire control system so it's capable of firing PAC-2 and PAC-3 missiles interchangeably. The Defense Acquisition Program Administration has also approved a plan to extend the range of the country's multiple launch rocket system from the current 30 kilometers to up to 80 kilometers by 2020. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, North Korea claims the North Korea-flagged oil tanker that loaded up on millions of dollars of crude oil from a rebel-held port in Libya has nothing to do with it. A spokesperson for the North Maritime Supervision Bureau told the state news agency on Thursday that the country is not responsible for the vessel named Morning Glory, and it belongs to Egypt's transport and freight service Golden East Logistics. The spokesperson said the North had lent its nationality to the vessel for 6 months due to a contractual matter, but has demanded a cancellation after the tanker took the delivery of crude without Tripoli's authority. Meanwhile, just hours after being removed in a vote of no confidence for failing to prevent the ship from fleeing, ousted Libyan Prime Minister Ali Zidane has left Libya, defying a travel ban. He's reportedly now in Europe, but his exact location is not known. Back here in South Korea, and there's rising hope. Doctors and the government will be able to talk through their differences and hopefully avert an upcoming 6-day doctors' strike planned for the last week of the month. Our Song Ji-son tells us about the issues dividing the two sides.
Medical doctors and the governments are preparing for a meeting after Prime Minister Chung Hong-won proposed talks by March 20th to seek a compromise. The Korean Medical Association of Doctors, upset over government's plan to implement telemedicine and to set up for-profit subsidiaries, is planning a 6-day strike from March 24th unless an agreement is reached. Doctors claim the government's plan could undermine public health. The government, on the other hand, says the new telemedicine system is necessary to offer benefits to the elderly, disabled, and patients in remote areas, along with people with chronic diseases. The doctors are also calling for a reform of the current public health plan, saying it earns them unreasonably low consultation fees, but at the same time burdens the public because of the high costs for services not covered by the state-run health system. Many Koreans rely on private insurance as the public health plan does not cover the full range of expenses. Medical fees in Korea are relatively cheaper than those of most developed countries. For example, the LASIK eyesight correction in Korea costs half of what it costs in the US. Hospitals have been accused of offsetting their losses by advising patients that they undergo costly checkup services like the MRIs. An OECD survey shows the pace of rise in medical spending is the second highest in Korea among member countries. Song Ji-son, Arirang News.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea, connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on NEWSLINE at Noon with Mark Broom and Jin-ju.
Market researcher, strategy analytics, said Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about...
Korea's Finance Minister Geunhye says the government will work on minimizing the impact of emerging market uncertainties stemming from the U.S. Federal Reserve's stimulus tapering. In a meeting with other policymakers Thursday, Minister Geunhye said the government will strengthen its monitoring of emerging economies so it can react to fluctuations before they have a significant impact on the Korean economy and foreign currency markets. He added that the government will establish strategies to further cooperate with these countries, saying those markets make up half of the world's GDP. Now, in that meeting, Finance Minister Geunhye also said Seoul will continue to push for more bilateral trade pacts with Southeast Asian countries as part of the government's drive to improve the trading environment for small and mid-sized companies. But concerns still linger about Korea's seemingly insatiable appetite for free trade deals. Our Na Hyun-kyung reports.
It's been 10 years since Korea signed its first bilateral free trade agreement with Chile. Since then, the trade volume between the two countries has increased more than fourfold, topping $7 billion last year. The Korean government has been signing many more FTAs over the last decade, with the most recent concluded negotiation being Seoul's trade pact with Canada. The local automobile and auto parts industry will likely benefit the most when the Canada deal takes effect. The Korea-US FTA will welcome its 2-year anniversary on Saturday, but opinions about whether the Korean economy has benefited from the much-contested deal over the past 2 years have been mixed. Last year, the government said Seoul's trade surplus with Washington jumped 44% compared to before the deal was ratified. But some industry experts say improved exports to the U.S. were on the back of a recovery in advanced economies rather than the bilateral trade deal.
It remains to be seen whether the government and experts will be able to evaluate the economic effects of the Korea-US deal with one voice this year. Another trade deal drawing much attention is the Korea-China FTA. The 10th round of negotiations will take place in Korea this month. The draft for tariff concession on highly sensitive items, mostly being agricultural products from Korea, has been exchanged and will be discussed in detail at the upcoming talks. Although analysts estimate Korea's GDP will increase by up to 3% in the 10 years after the deal is signed, skeptics say the bilateral pact will devastate Korea's agricultural sector. Those for and against the government's initiative to sign more free trade deals continue to lock horns, and it's still unclear whether the government's ongoing FTA negotiations will help or harm the Korean economy. 나현경, Arirang News.
There were no surprises in final rate-setting session for outgoing Bank of Korea Governor Kim Jung-soo, whose four-year term ends at the end of this month. The central bank has left its key interest rate unchanged at 2.5% for the 10th straight month in March. Following its monthly monetary policy meeting on Thursday, the BOK said the economy at home and abroad are continuing to recover at a moderate pace, but did note the risks coming from emerging markets. The nation's inflation rate ran below the central bank's target band for the 21st straight month in February, standing at 1%.
Now to some welcome news on the job front. The number of newly employed workers in Korea rose at its fastest pace in 12 years in February, showing signs of improvement in the local economy. Son Jung-in reports.
The Korean economy may be showing signs of improvement. The number of newly employed workers rose at its fastest pace in more than a decade last month. Statistics Korea says the number of those employed in February stood at 24.8 million, up 835,000 from a year earlier. The figure represents the largest on-year job growth since March 2002. The country's unemployment rate, however, shot up to 4.5%, a half a percentage point increase from the same period last year. In fact, the number of those unemployed stood at 1.2 million in February, the highest level in 2 years. The state-run agency points to an increase in the number of young people seeking jobs for the seemingly contradicting figures that show an increase in both the number of newly employed workers and unemployed people. Those in their 20s who are new college graduates are now searching for work ahead of recruitment season, which runs from late February to April this year. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
As Korea gears up for the International Electric Vehicle Expo on Jeju Island later this week, a trio of private companies have announced plans to install EV charging stations at one of the nation's biggest retail outlets. Kim Jeon reports.
Drivers will soon be able to recharge their electric vehicles at E-Mart, the largest retail outlet in Korea. E-Mart is aiming to install 60 EV charging stations at stores around the country by the end of this year. An E-Mart official says that an electric car can run for around 49 kilometers, roughly a 40-minute drive on a 1-hour charge, which may be useful for people driving short distances after shopping for groceries and heading straight home. To build the stations, E-Mart teamed up with POSCO, Korea's largest steelmaker, and BMW Korea, which is releasing its new i3 electric vehicle next month. The three companies plan to build 40 additional EV charging stations at E-Mart by next year. This is the first such attempt by private companies to facilitate the use of electric vehicles in Korea. The country's existing 1,900 EV charging stations were built with government support. E-Mart's new EV charging stations will be able to accommodate all kinds of electric vehicles. All users will have to do is purchase a membership card. Users will be able to find the charging station locations through a smartphone app provided by POSCO or the navigation system in the new i3. The move to launch the new stations comes ahead of the International Electric Vehicle Expo, scheduled to start Saturday at the International Convention Center on Jeju Island. More than 2,000 people are expected to attend the event, including personnel from 40 related industries, including Kia Motors and BMW. Kim Jeon, Arirang News.
Good day, I'm Eunice Kim, and here are your headlines from around the world. We'll begin with some new clues about what may have happened to the missing Malaysia Airlines jetliner that seemingly disappeared on Saturday with 239 people on board. China's Geunhye news agency reports that 3 suspicious floating objects were spotted along the southern tip of Vietnam on satellite images posted on the Chinese government's website. This is near the original flight path of the Boeing 777, and meanwhile, Malaysia's military says it has traced what could be plane parts on the western side of the country in an area south of Thailand's Phuket Island, hundreds of kilometers away from the plane's last known location. The Associated Press reports the massive search will span over waters both east and west of Malaysia and could even expand toward India today. We will stand with Ukraine. This is the pledge U.S. President Barack Obama made to Ukrainian Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk, who was at the White House Thursday to campaign for U.S. support. Obama also called on Russian President Vladimir Putin to rethink Crimea's vote 3 days before the referendum that is widely believed will favor Crimea's secession from Ukraine to join the Russian Federation. Meanwhile, a bill that would authorize a $1 billion loan to Ukraine is making its way through the U.S. Senate. This as the leaders of the G7 group of nations earlier said they will not recognize the results of Sunday's referendum. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon urged the eyes of the world back onto the Syrian civil war, which entered its 4th year on Wednesday. Ban called the situation in Syria the biggest humanitarian and peace and security crisis facing the world, while acknowledging Syria's neighbors, who he said were shouldering the increasingly unbearable effects of war. In a statement, he directly addressed Russia and the United States to take clear steps to re-energize peace talks as the initiating states of the Geneva Conference on Syria. More than 140,000 have died in the civil war since the uprisings against President Bashar al-Assad in 2011. And over in Turkey, thousands congregated in an Istanbul neighborhood Wednesday to mourn the passing of 15-year-old Berkin Elvan. He died Tuesday after being caught in the crossfire of police and demonstrators. A police tear gas canister hit the boy in the head, leaving him comatose for the past 9 months. News of his death reignited anger at the Turkish government and its police, triggering protests in cities across the country, the fiercest demonstrations since June. Police reacted by firing water cannons, tear gas, and rubber pellets at the crowds.
Good afternoon, I'm Lee Ji-hyun with your latest weather forecast. Well, it's breezy, windy, and cloudy this afternoon, and the afternoon highs will remain below 10 degrees Celsius across the nation today. So the Seoul metro area will have similar daytime highs compared to yesterday, while down south will have temperatures that are around 5 degrees lower than yesterday. And yes, the nation is covered with lots of clouds, but it will be a rain-free day for Seoul and the surrounding areas. But for the rest of the country, be sure to have an umbrella handy because on and off showers are expected during the day. And it's been snowing in parts of Gangwon-do and Gyeongsang-do. So as we can see, a heavy snow advisory has been issued. So please be aware of that if you're in those areas. Now, the temperatures tomorrow will be similar to today, but the sky will be mostly sunny nationwide. Now, the good news is, though, this weekend we can expect the weather to look more like spring. It will be warm and sunny. Good conditions if you're planning to be outdoors. With that in mind, let's take a closer look at the readings for today. The afternoon high in the capital and Daegu will peak at 9, while Gwangju and Busan will both get up to 8 under lots of clouds. Now let's see how other regions are looking. It looks like down on Jeju and Daejeon will climb up to 9, and Dokdo will be chilly at 3 this afternoon. Well, that's all from me today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.
And those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Join us again for more updates on the day's headlines on our next newscast at 2 p.m. Korea time.
And Geunhye and I will be back at the same time tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.